Welcome to Check-In with Jason Lauritsen, where we explore how to create human, connected workplaces that employees love and that fuel organizational success. Each week, I invite someone who is leading the way in this work to join me for a conversation to help educate and inspire us. This week, my guest is Shane Jackson. Shane is the president of Jackson Healthcare, the parent company of more than 20 healthcare workforce businesses that serve over 20 million patients each year. He's led the organization through growth that's landed it on the Forbes list of America's top private companies, placement on the Fortune 100 best companies to work for and best workplaces in healthcare lists, a spot on the People Companies That Care list, and nearly a decade of Great Place to Work certification. They have a full trophy case. And they have recently added also a top 100 most inspiring workplaces in North America for 2025 to that trophy case, which is where kind of our paths crossed or how we ended up here having this conversation today. Shane is also the author of 2 books, This Is the Thing, about life, joy, and owning your purpose, and Fostering Culture, a leader's guide to purposefully shaping culture. Lots to learn from this guy. So Shane, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I always like to start by getting to know a little bit more about your business and you. And so can you start by telling us a little bit more about your company, please?
Sure, happy to. We have a really, really neat business. The essence of what we do is making sure that people all over the country in all 50 states, when they're in a moment where they need care, they need medical care, that there's someone there to do that, that the right caregivers in the right place at the right moment. And so everything we do is about healthcare workforce. And we accomplish that through a lot of different ways. The biggest part of what we do is we have thousands of physicians that work in various healthcare facilities around the country on a temporary basis, maybe subbing in for someone or covering while they're finding someone full time. And pretty much anyone in the chain of providing care, nurses, therapists, et cetera, as well as the support staff, non-clinical people that work to support them. We'll provide them on a temporary basis, outsource, permanent. We have some technology companies that, again, are all around making sure that healthcare organizations are able to have the right person in the right place at the right time. So that's what we do.
So can you tell me, just because we're going to talk about, this is a conversation that's going to largely be anchored in kind of workforce and culture and that sort of thing. Can you give me a sense of kind of the size and scale of your organization and kind of how you work? Are people all on site together in a single location? Are they all over the country? Like, what does that look like?
Sure. So we have kind of 2 elements to our workforce. We refer to them, this isn't like great language, but we refer to them as our internal and our externals. So the externals are all the doctors and nurses that, they're working for us, but they're all over the country. Like they're in hospitals and urgent care facilities and physician offices and, anywhere that a patient could be seen, we could be there. We literally, like, I have a doctor working in more than 90% of the hospitals in the country today. Wow. So we have a pretty big footprint. Our internal employees are all our folks that are supporting all of our externals, right? And so we're the ones that are helping with the travel and the bookings and all the credentialing and all the coordination and kind of all that stuff that happens to support all of those people. And so we obviously have to think about and care for all of them, but it's a very, very different thing.
Sure.
The externals, while we have doctors and stuff who worked for us for years, sometimes it's more transactional, temporary basis. They may come on and work, for a month or 2, then go back to their full-time practice, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Our internals are, typically they're more what you think of as full-time employees. They work for us all the time.
And so is your internal staff, which I'm assuming, like when we start talking about workplace, I'm guessing a lot of that will be focused on your internal folks, because you're your externals are they're in like a billion different workplaces all the time. But
right.
for your internals, are they all in one location? Are they spread around the country? Like, what does that look like?
Sure. Yeah. So it's about 60% of our internals are based out of our headquarters, which is just north of Atlanta in Alpharetta, Georgia. Okay. And then the other 40% are spread around the country. We have our next biggest office is in Orlando. We have an office in Omaha. We have some smaller offices, Seattle, Dallas, Denver, kind of around. But then we also have a pretty substantial workforce that's virtual. And so, like you said this in your introduction, but we actually have like 21 different companies that are part of Jackson Healthcare. Some of those businesses are completely virtual. Some are completely on site. Most have hybrid, where they've got people who are on site sometime, off site sometime, that sort of thing. And so it really depends on the business, and a lot of it is kind of based on what they do. There are some businesses where they just have to be in person because of what they do.
Sure.
And there are some that, it just kind of makes more sense to have them virtual.
Well, one of the things I didn't realize until this moment that you have an office in Omaha, which is where I currently am. That's where I live. So maybe someday our paths will actually cross in person in Omaha, so down the road. But so I am fascinated always in people's origin stories. And so I am curious for yours. Can you tell me a little bit about your kind of history with the company and kind of how you came to be doing what you do today and kind of how you got into this work?
Yeah, sure. So my entire professional career has been in healthcare and mostly around workforce issues, not entirely, but mostly. And so my father, when I was very young, actually started the first company that ever convinced a hospital to pay them to help them hire a doctor. Like, that wasn't a thing. And in the late 70s, he started this business to do that. And so he did that until the late 80s, and then kind of went and did a whole bunch of other stuff. He's very much an entrepreneurial, had some successes and some things not work so well. And so he found himself kind of middle of his career, kind of starting over. And so this was right at the time I had worked for a while and gone back to grad school, did my MBA. I actually had another job lined up coming out of grad school, and he came down, had dinner one night, and he said, "Hey, instead of doing that, I've got this idea. What do you think about this?" And so that was in the year 2000, and literally the whole thesis behind the original company was applying this, still kind of new thing called the internet as a way to create differentiation in service businesses. And so I went to work with him. We started, his whole career was in healthcare, and so we just were starting businesses trying to leverage the internet in healthcare services. And so that's what we didn't call it that at first, but about 4 or 5 years later, we started growing, and we're like, hey, we need a name. Anyway, so that's where Jackson Healthcare came from. So this is our 25th anniversary. And so my dad's our founder. I've been here pretty much from the beginning, and I've done a whole lot of things, run several of our businesses and that sort of thing. And then I've moved into the role of running all Jackson Healthcare in 2014, so 11 years.
So there's so much to talk about. Obviously, you have built a really exceptional culture, an exceptional workplace, as evidenced by the trophy case. And
there is literally a trophy case, and it's right outside my office door, just so you know.
I bet it is. There's a lot of hardware to house. Yeah. So I'm glad that you're showing it off. That's something you should be proud of. When we were kind of, talking through where we would focus this conversation, you said something to me that really struck a chord, because it kind of it resonates with something that I often talk about as well. And that you said, you think that we're kind of in this moment in time, obviously, where we're in an interesting time right now, in particular, even just with around staffing and whatever. There's been we came through a period of where it was really tipped sort of in favor of the employee. It was like it was a seller's market. Now we're kind of in more of a buyer's market, and things go back and forth. And and that there's been a real movement over the last 10, 20 years to build workplaces that people want to work for, right? Talent magnets, right? Attract people. And you said, I think a lot of organizations misunderstood or misinterpreted what that means. And so I'm like, amen, let's talk about this. And so what do you think, what do you see people are getting wrong when you say that?
Yeah. And first of all, kind of to part of your statement there around, is the dynamic shifting from where, it's very much kind of demand driven and workers had all the power, right? Because there's enough of them. And a lot of this conversation started years ago with, it was the whole, talent wars and all that sort of thing. So I would first of all say that, all the recent data coming out around jobs and, from Bureau of Labor and Statistics, I guess we can believe it. I don't know, people are getting fired over it and then it keeps getting worse. I'm not, all that said, my view is that actually that dynamic is really not changing anytime soon. I mean, there's just demographic issues, even though, maybe it looks like kind of overall employment is not as great as it was. We're still like 4.5% national unemployment. Right. Like everyone I talk to, every business owner I talk to would still tell you, yeah, it's hard to find great people. Like, I mean, and so I don't think that this is changing over the long term, but yeah, there has been, I think, this great realization over the last 10 to 15 years. It's like, hey, we've got to be a place where people want to come work because it is hard to find great people. And I do think that there has been some misfires by a lot of organizations in how they do that. So as you mentioned, I wrote a book about 8 years ago called Fostering Culture. And, it's how leaders can create strong cultures in their organization. It was originally an internal document that I wrote for our leaders. As it came out when I transitioned leadership from my father. And we were growing like crazy. And I was like, I got to have my leaders understand our culture, what drives it, and all that, so that we can sustain it through growth and all that. And so I had a buddy of mine read it, and he's like, hey, I think other people get value out of this. You ought to put it up for sale. So we put it up on Amazon and we've had a bunch of people read it. But it's led for me the opportunity to, over the last 8 years, travel around the country talking about culture. And so I've had the opportunity to literally talk to thousands of people about culture and hear this. And one of the things I say this in my speeches often, and it's like I always offend somebody when I do it. But what like drives me crazy is what people have culture meetings. They're like, okay, well now we're gonna all right, the real meeting's over. Now we're gonna have a culture meeting. It's on the calendar, and it's like usually involves like bringing cupcakes or something. As if like that's like cupcakes or, kegs or like whatever, you kind of do is like some of your culture. And I always tell people, like, if I want to understand your culture, I want to watch how you handle conflict. Yeah. I want to watch how you handle difficult conversations. I want to see how you communicate. I want to see what your cultural expectation is around availability. When people should be available, when they should respond, like that sort of thing. It's all, creates that atmosphere. It's like, this is the way we do things. It makes you feel a certain way. Like that's the atmosphere that in a culture. And that's what it is. And I think, a lot of us as leaders have thought, okay, we got to go like create these very purposeful organizations, and we got to do, a lot of this. And I've even seen this over the last few years with all the talk about mental health, as if like, okay, we got to, kind of provide these mental health things and all that. And not that any of that stuff is bad. It's great. But at the end of the day, if I'm concerned going to work with you, I'm concerned about a lot more. I like purpose is another example. We've heard a lot of leaders, especially Gen Z, and millennials before that, like, hey, they want to be a part of work that's part of something bigger, aligned with purpose in their life. And then as leaders, we've said like, oh, I've got to give purpose to my team, right? I've got to come up with this purpose. So you can't give purpose to someone else. Like that's inherent. That's what something that comes from within. And so, with leaders, my encouragement to them is like, you're not going to change someone's values. You're not going to give them purpose. What you've got to do is create incredible clarity about this is our purpose. These are our values. These are our beliefs, the things that we think are true, the things that we think that work, the things that we don't compromise on. Like this is it. And if you identify with that, come on board. And that's how you create an environment where people want to be. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
I love it. I think that resonates for me in a couple of ways. I think one is, as that last part you were talking about, I think you're right. I do think a lot of leaders miss the point on purpose when they hear that. It's like either number one, they think we have to somehow manufacture this thing called purpose that somehow is transactional, or I think they over-index on, well, that means we just need to have a whole bunch of volunteer activities, or we need to do a bunch of performative kind of investments in the community. And it's like, that's not, I think you're missing it. And the thing that for me tipped that was clear back to my first corporate role. I was an HR manager, came into an organization that the CEO, this was an organization that we were in debt collections. And like you talk about a business like where, that is a rough business. Mm-hmm. And the CEO there, though, had a very clear and strong, he had a sense of purpose, and he articulated kind of in the work that we were doing that, much like you described at the very beginning, you're like, you didn't lead with kind of the thing that you do. You led with the impact that your folks are having on the world and on patients. And he would talk about how he's like, the work that we do helps keep the economy healthy. And we are also helping, we're sort of making this profession a noble profession. Like we're sort of bringing some real meaning. And so it was really interesting. And so it's like, wow, if we can, and people bought it. We bought it. I bought hook, line, and sinker. And so I was fully full of purpose in a debt collection business. So like you tell me that you can't do it in any other kinds of business, I don't get it. And so that really resonates. The other thing that clicked for me as you were talking too is just so many people thinking that, I think the stuff they're focusing on, the mental health thing, I think is a great example of just right, really important, but they miss the bigger question, which is, how is your organization contributing to causing the mental health in the first place? And maybe if we design work so that it's giving people the things they actually need, which is more that underlying stuff, you don't need, or it just doesn't, it reduces the need for that or the reliance. It's like we're treating the symptom and not the cause. And so I know that was a very good answer.
Yeah. Well, sorry before you move on.
Yeah.
First of all, what you said about mental health, I completely agree. But back to your first thing, and the guy running the debt collection business, the thing that stood out to me about that story, and you started with, is you said it was the way he felt and he viewed it. And this is the point I try to make with leaders all the time. Like, I don't care what your purpose is. If it's to bring dignity to work, if it's to heal the economy, if it's to care for people in vulnerable moments, or if it's like our purpose is, we're here to make a lot of money. If that's what your purpose is, I don't care. Just be authentic about it.
Yeah.
Because where people really mess this up is they say, I've got to come up with this altruistic sounding purpose so I can attract talent, but it actually has nothing to do with me or the way I run this business. And that's where you get into hypocrisy. And like, that's the worst. And if your deal is, we're just going to try to make as much money in a shorter time as we can, which, by the way, that's a lot of businesses, fine. And you will be able to find a lot of people who are highly aligned with that purpose. Like, go for it, but just don't make it up because you're trying to tell people what you think that they want to hear. That's where you really get sideways. And that's what I love about your example. Like, this guy, like, he believed that it was authentic. And so he got people aligned with like, hey, I can get on board with that.
Yeah. No, that's a really, really great point. And I think that that's fuel for leaders, number one, when you can lead from your own sense of authentic purpose. But it's also really dangerous to pretend like to hide that, because I don't know what your experience is, but my experience, both in my own journeys, but also in the clients I work with, is, I mean, those young folks, they do want purpose, but they also can sniff out a fake, right? They cut through it and they have zero tolerance for you BSing them too. So it's really dangerous, and it almost always backfires when you do the performative purpose game, because it's just never gonna work. So So I want to. So let's talk about how you have tackled this internally, because I know that I believe culture starts with values. That's kind of where the definition begins. And I know you are really serious about values internally. So I'd love to talk a little bit about just your approach, your methodology. What you've shared with people in your book, and as you speak about how do you build a true culture that attracts people and retains people and motivates them to higher performance?
Yeah, well, you said it exactly right. I mean, culture, it's all the things that you do, it's how we do things, and based on that, how that makes people feel, right? That atmosphere and the reasons that groups do things, right? I mean, we all kind of face with the same questions, like, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Whatever, right? But we make different choices, and the reasons some groups make some choices, other groups make other things. It's the same reason that people make different choices in their lives. And it really stems from our values and beliefs. So those principles that we give great worth, they really fundamentally drive what we do. They're largely instilled in us by the time we're about 8 years old, right? They're just really fundamental to us. And then beliefs, which is the things that we think are true or the things that we think work. This is the like, hey, I've just always found when I do this, it gets the results I want. Or I tried that one time, it didn't work for me, it ended in a disaster. I don't believe that works, right? And so we have these in every area of our life, and especially like our jobs. Like, this is why when you're on the job and it's like, somebody says, I think we ought to do this, and somebody else says like, no, I don't think that'll work. I don't think that'll work. It's because they have those beliefs, right? And so groups coalesce around these. And it drives the decisions that they make as a group. And so what we've tried to do is just create incredible clarity around what those core values are, especially, and what those kind of core beliefs are, those principles that really guide our decisions here. And we do it in a number of ways. I mean, the first one, it started, as I mentioned, like I wrote a book on this, and it was basically a training guide for our leaders. Leaders have an outsized impact on culture because they get to reward certain behaviors and punish other behaviors, right? And so and so making sure that group knew and understood, like, hey, these are the principles behind the decisions that we're making. And so and we do that through a number of ways. I mean, it's infused in our leadership training, infused in our onboarding and our mentoring. We include those things in the evaluations of our leaders and our people. When they do 360s, like, are they exhibiting the values or all of that? It is very much like our values are very much of just a part of our conversations. And it's one of those things, I actually heard it from somebody literally last week. They made this comment, and they're like, hey, like I've worked here. I think the guy said he's here like 6 weeks. And he said, I've worked other places. And he said, I've never worked a place where they actually do talk about their values in like conversations. He's like, he's like, I've never seen it before. It's like, it actually happens here. And that's what I tell people. I'm like, you're not going to believe me till you get here. But, like with our values, we really do say like, okay, like what's the wise thing to do here? And wisdom is one of our values. And so anyway, but you got to create that clarity. It's got to be real. They've got to see it exhibited and all that. And then it becomes kind of part of the norms.
So if you would, I'd love to just rewind the clock a little bit for to kind of back up a little bit in sort of some of the steps maybe that you navigated through in order to get to where like you have a pretty mature organization and process from a standpoint of you've been, consistent leader, consistently, leading from these values for a while. But when you took this on, I don't know where the story starts, where you were like, we're going to really commit to this and we're going to put this at the center of leadership. I'm thinking at it through the lens of someone who maybe knows that either their organization needs to be clearer about their values and wants to align to them, or maybe has values but really isn't actioning on them, isn't sort of making them part of it. What are some of the key early steps that you took that you think were really important in setting the stage for kind of where you evolved to today?
Yeah. So, and I would say, like, first of all, I when I speak on this, a lot of times I speak to people who work in small businesses or own or run small businesses. And, I'm sitting there going like, oh yeah, I've got a whole learning and development team that is focused on training our leader. And they're like, I have 15 people in my company. Like, I don't have that. Right.
Yeah.
And so I always say like, we didn't always have this. At one point we had 15 people, and so, obviously the way you apply these principles when you have 15 people is different than when you have thousands of people, like, right. I mean, but actually the principles are the same. And so, again, as the leader, and especially like if you're the founder, like, or leading a small business, you have such an outsized influence on culture and what people do, because they watch you and go like, you're in charge. Oh, okay. Well, that's how he handled this. That's what she did. I guess that's what we do. Like, this is the way he talks to people. I guess that's the expectation of how I should do whatever. Right.
Yep.
And so my encouragement, like, to anyone, especially as a small business, like, you don't have to go write a book. You don't have to create leadership training and all that sort of thing. But I do think it is worth the time for you to create personal clarity on your purpose, values, and beliefs so that you can be intentional and consistent in your actions so that your team understands what's expected. Right. And so at least you're not saying like, oh yeah, we're really concerned about the customer. And then they watch you do something that screws your customer to earn an extra buck. Right. Like, yeah. I mean, so at least be clear there, and so that you realize the impact that you're having on others in the way that they think they ought to act. And so, and that was this. I mean, early on, like, that was it. It was my dad. He was the founder. People watched what he did, and we went, okay, I guess this is what you should do. To get to your question, kind of about the journey. So we were several years into the business, and we hired someone to run HR for us. And he really encouraged my dad to like write down his values. And my dad will tell you, he resisted it for a while because he's like, I mean, those are personal. Like, I don't want to, push those on other people. And he's like, no, I think it would be good for people to understand this, so they don't have to just infer it from what you're doing. And so my dad did. And I think there was 24 of them. And it was actually like, somebody created this fancy looking poster and stuff. And we put them up, and it was actually really good. It was really helpful stuff. It was very, very authentic for my dad. Like, nobody like said, oh, he doesn't act like that. Like, I mean, my dad's a pretty authentic person, and it was really, really good. And so when I took over and started running the business, though, we were just really, really starting to grow. We weren't just in one location anymore. We were nationwide and all this. And I was sitting there going like, okay, I got leaders who will never meet my dad. Like, how do I do this? And so this was actually kind of mean, but I called him one day. I said, hey, Dad, hey, will you tell me what the values are? And we call them values that drive our culture. I was like, tell me what they are. And it was like 5 categories. There's like 5 main ones, and then there was like sub ones in all of them. And I think he got like 7 or 8, and I don't even think he got all the main 5 categories. And he was like, okay, I think I get your point. And I was like, yeah, if you wrote them, if you can't remember them, how can we expect anyone else to remember them, much less act on them? Sure. And so I went kind of through this process. I was like, I really want to get this down to 3. Like, I can remember 3 things. When my wife sends me to the grocery store for 3 things, I can remember it. If it goes beyond that, I have to write it down, right?
Right.
And so, I tell people, like, we didn't actually drop any of the 24. Like, we still believe, in integrity, even though it's not listed as one of ours anymore. The other ones all kind of rolled up into those, and, the way we did to encapsulate it. But that for us was really helpful of just encapsulating in a way that people could remember and understand, and then more importantly, activate. Like, okay, how do I apply this in that method? And then, from then, as we grew, we activated it in different ways. But that was really that was how it happened.
So I'm inferring, at least from some of the comments that you have made, that you view kind of probably the most important levers in ensuring that these values continue to be a central part of the culture is making sure that your leaders are equipped to live them, to model them, to reinforce them in their work. What have you found to be, I guess I'll ask you just kind of, what have you found to be the most effective means? I mean, you wrote an entire book, so that, like, you've done a lot of stuff on this, but what have you found to be the most effective thing in reinforcing that with leaders, or making sure that they're getting, that they're doing that? And what have you found to be the most challenging part of doing that with leaders?
The most effective means, make sure the leaders understand this and take it seriously, is firing someone over a values issue. I have a chapter in my book and it's titled "Hires Refine Your Culture, Fires Define Your Culture." When you are willing to publicly say, we terminated this person's employment because when we talk about respecting other people as individuals, we mean it. Guess what? That gets everyone on board really fast, right? And that's kind of a harsh thing, but I mean, but it is like we just have to be very, very clear that that we mean what we say on this, which means also being able to sometimes get rid of people who are high performers but aren't culturally aligned. Another kind of phrase I have in my culture, in my book, is that there's no such thing as a star performer who's a cancer. If you're a cancer of the organization, I don't care how much revenue you generate, you're not a star performer, right? And as a larger organization, it's a little bit easier to say we're going to take a stand on this. But I have also been the person when we had, like 10 people, and I had to fire my one and only salesperson because they were mistreating people. Right? And so that takes a lot of guts to do for small businesses. But that's it. The other thing I would say is also, though, and this is where we're still growing and trying to figure out how to do this, is yes, leaders are your main lever to drive and strengthen your culture, but there's got to be cultural understanding throughout the organization such that when you have a leader who isn't culturally aligned, there's channels back, there's realization of that, and then channels back to report that, right? And so another story I tell in my book, this was years and years ago, way before I wrote the book. I wasn't running the company, that sort of thing. And anyway, I got called into this meeting kind of with our new hires, and the guy was talking about culture, and he's like, "Hey, Shane, what do you think about our culture?" And I said, "Well, my definition of culture is the way your boss treats you, because it doesn't matter what we say in here. If your boss doesn't treat you well, your culture sucks." And I was not invited back into those meetings anymore. But I literally just had this conversation with my executive team this week, because they were asking me, like, "Hey, we kind of see like this remote office and this team or whatever, and they don't feel culturally aligned. Like, what do we do?" And I said, "We have to fix the leader or replace the leader." Like, because if they're not treating their people well, if they're not creating clarity, if they're not complete, like all the things, like they're not, there's really nothing else we can do. Right. And so anyway, it's having that clarity, and then honestly, it's having accountability around it.
Yeah. It's like the most effective or important thing is also the most challenging thing, right? Because you have to swallow hard and make those decisions, because in the long run, if you don't, the message it sends will kill your culture, undermine it. So thank you for sharing that. We, like I said, there's a lot more that we could get into, but I think that's a really great foundation for people on thinking about culture, focusing on the right things, understanding what values looks like. So I want to transition and ask you, what's a challenge that you're currently wrestling with in your organization? What's something that's keeping you up at night?
I think probably something right now that virtually everyone else is as well is, trying to understand technology and its impact on work, and how we're going to work, for us, not only how are we going to serve our clients and that sort of thing, but like how's it going to impact just the nature of work and, and what we do. And things are changing quickly, and we have not, in my opinion, hit the steep part of the change curve when it comes to AI yet. I mean, we're still in the early phases. And so, I think thinking through that, and, for us, because we have a culture that is very much focused on, our people and being a place where people can come and thrive and all that. How do you, juxtapose honoring people, supporting people, and the changes that are happening in the environment and the things that you got to do as a business to continue to compete that is going to impact some people's jobs, right?
Yeah.
And so, and so how do you navigate through that? And so, we're really right now, and even I gave a talk yesterday about this with some of our folks. Our three values are others first, wisdom, and growth. Others first is thinking about others for yourself. Wisdom, doing the wise thing, and growth. For us, it's not to get bigger. We say growth is to keep getting better. That we just have a moral obligation as well as an economic obligation to continue to improve and grow in everything we do all the time. And I kind of joke with other people, like everyone likes to talk about others first, because it's like, well, really, I want you to think of others first, meaning me,
Right.
And wisdom is, it's kind of nice. Like we're thinking about the long term and thinking about other people and all that sort of thing. I like that one. Like people don't like to talk about growth as much, because when you talk about growth, it implies hard work to grow and accountability around if you're growing and all that sort of thing. And so we're really right now having to lean into talking about that value of, during a time of great uncertainty, not only around AI and all that, but we're in healthcare. A lot's changing in healthcare. And there's a lot around reimbursement, things coming out of, DC and all that right now. There's just a lot of uncertainty. And we're leaning into that value of, hey, we feel called to continually get better in everything we do. And that means some hard. And it's always been that way, but that's part of who we are. And so that's struggle right now.
Well, and you're getting it from kind of all directions too, because, your client base is getting disrupted in all kinds of ways too. So you have a lot of complexity in the mix.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing that. So last question I have for you, and I ask this question of everybody, is kind of a hopeful, forward-looking question. And so the question is, when you think about 5 years from now, what do you hope will be different about work? And I mean, I'm talking work in the broad sense, not work at your organization, but work broadly in the world. What do you hope will be different about work than it is today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so what's interesting about AI and some of these tools is that it is in some ways similar to other disruptions that have happened throughout history to the nature of work. Right, industrial revolution, introduction of technology and robotics and all that sort of thing. What's really different, though, is that most of the innovations has disrupted manual labor type work. What AI is, it's very disruptive of informational and knowledge workers. right? And that's a new thing that I think our society is trying to figure out how to get through. And so, I don't, as mentioned earlier, I think we're on the slow part of the change curve right now. I don't know exactly when the fast part of the curve is. It's definitely in the next 10 years, probably almost certainly in the next 5 years, probably in the next 3, it's coming. And I think as leaders, we've got to be clear with people that I think there's a lot of disruption coming. Like, it's just like the Industrial Revolution, like, some of these other things. It's going to disrupt, and it's going to change and even eliminate a lot of jobs. Now, long term, I get a lot more optimistic. And long term's maybe 5 years, maybe it's 7 years. I don't know what it is, right? But I think we'll have some disruption. On the other side of that, though, I think that some of these technologies could be the miracle pill we needed to survive some of the demographic challenges that we're facing as a society, where we have a lot more older people who are no longer producers, they're only consumers, and there's fewer and fewer of us who are going to have to provide for them. We had to, as a society, figure out how to get a lot more efficient and effective in order to take care of that. And I think some of these technologies that are coming out are going to enable us to do that. I think that there's just going to be a lot of jobs where some of the kind of more menial parts of the job are going to be taken care of, and allow people to be more creative, be more solution oriented, innovative, and that sort of thing. And so I do think there's a lot of good on the other side of it. I think there's also 5 years from now going to be jobs that you can't even conceive of today, right? I never thought that would be a job, but yes, of course it is. And which is like, if you look back 20 years ago, there's jobs we have today people would have never even been dreamed of as a job. So I'm pretty optimistic long term, but I'm pretty realistic that in the kind of short to midterm, there's going to be some disruption.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really I like that, the take of there is kind of a hopeful future out there, but we've got quite a ride between now and there, and who knows what exactly that's going to look like. Yeah. And so it's a very good challenge for leaders to take on right now, to think about how you can equip yourself, your organization, and your people to go on that ride. And I love your value about growth, because what it reminds me of is that perhaps the most important skill or competence we need right now is learning. Right. And that's going to get more and more important, which is going to be interesting to just see how that plays out. So Shane, this has been fun. I appreciate you joining me. I like to wrap up with a one-word checkout. And so in one word, how are you feeling as we wrap up this conversation?
Full.
Good. And I'm going to say hopeful, because I'm really appreciative of leaders like you who are doing the work and showing what's possible, and then willing to share your work with others. Because I think, at least what I find in a lot of ways, is a lot of CEOs and a lot of business leaders and executives end up in the seat and didn't really get the opportunity or didn't have the development to learn how to do some of this stuff. And so they need the learning too. And so I'm really grateful for your sharing your work with the world. So appreciate it.
Very kind. Thanks for saying that.
Well, I will, as we wrap up, I want to make sure people know where they can find more about you. They obviously can buy your books wherever books are sold. We will put some links to that in the show notes. They can also go visit shanejackson.com, where they can find more about you, your writing, your speaking, all of the different work that you do. I am envious of your name, because I also have a website in my name that nobody can spell my last name. So I'm jealous of that. So Shane Jackson, you can probably figure that out. Go check it out. Shane, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate you being here.
It's great being here. Appreciate it.
And thank you for listening. I hope that this is as inspiring or informative or instructive for you as it feels like it was to me. I hope you can take it back, take your values, make them real, bring them to life, really dig in and do the work. Really, probably no more important work that you can do in your organization if you want it to grow and thrive and sustain. So go do the work. And please remember, as always, reach out and check in with the people in your life who matter most to you. Might be the most important thing you can do today. Till next time.